In a world brimming with noise, distractions, and relentless demands on our attention, finding a sense of inner peace can feel like an elusive pursuit. Yet, within each of us lies the power to cultivate tranquility, not through grand gestures or dramatic changes, but through the quiet, intentional elimination of the mental and emotional clutter that clouds our minds and weighs down our spirits. The ancient philosophy of Stoicism offers us a timeless guide to this process, encouraging us to look inward and release the things that no longer serve us. The habit of complaining. Complaining is one of those seemingly harmless habits that we tend to indulge in without much thought, but it can be deeply corrosive to both our mental and emotional well-being. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we can control and to let go of everything else. Complaining, however, is the antithesis of this philosophy. When we complain, we are essentially rejecting reality as it is, wishing for things to be different rather than accepting them. Complaining may provide a brief sense of relief or validation, but in reality, it feeds into a cycle of negativity that can become self-perpetuating. Over time, it conditions our minds to focus on what is wrong, what is lacking, or what is unfair, rather than on what is good, abundant, or within our power to change. Furthermore, complaints do little to alter external circumstances. They do not solve problems, nor do they inspire constructive action. Instead, they often lead to a sense of helplessness and frustration. Complaining is also contagious. When we vocalize our grievances, we may influence others around us to adopt a similarly negative mindset, spreading dissatisfaction like a virus. The Stoics believed in the power of our internal dialogue and the importance of keeping our minds free from toxic thoughts. By eliminating the habit of complaining, we can create space for gratitude, perspective, and resilience. Rather than dwelling on what we find unpleasant, we can train ourselves to see obstacles as opportunities for growth and challenges as tests of our character. The world is filled with hardship and suffering, but it is also filled with beauty, kindness, and potential. Complaining distorts our perception of the world, narrowing our focus to what is wrong and blinding us to what is right. By practicing quiet acceptance and reframing our challenges as valuable experiences, we not only improve our own lives but also contribute to a more positive and uplifting environment for those around us. Ultimately, the elimination of complaints allows us to reclaim our power, shifting our energy away from what we cannot change and toward what we can, our own attitudes and actions. The need for external validation. The desire for external validation is a deeply ingrained part of the human condition, rooted in our need for social connection and approval. However, Stoicism teaches that this desire can become a major source of inner turmoil if left unchecked. The moment we place our self-worth in the hands of others, we become vulnerable to their judgments, opinions, and whims. We start to mold our behavior to fit the expectations of others, often at the expense of our own values and authenticity. This craving for validation can manifest in many ways, whether through the pursuit of praise and recognition at work, the constant need for reassurance in relationships, or the unhealthy obsession with social media and the approval of strangers online. The Stoics believed that true contentment comes from within, not from the fleeting affirmations of others. When we base our sense of self-worth on external validation, we hand over control of our happiness to forces beyond our control. This makes us susceptible to disappointment and insecurity, as the opinions of others are fickle and ever-changing. Additionally, the pursuit of validation can lead to a life lived for others rather than for ourselves. We may find ourselves making choices that are not aligned with our own values or desires, simply because we fear judgment or rejection. The Stoic solution to this problem is to cultivate a strong internal locus of control. This means deriving our sense of worth and fulfillment from our own actions, values, and virtues rather than from external sources. By quietly eliminating the need for validation, we free ourselves from the constant anxiety of seeking approval and the fear of criticism. Instead, we can focus on living in accordance with our own principles and acting with integrity, knowing that our worth is not dependent on the opinions of others. This shift in mindset allows us to become more self-assured, confident, and at peace with who we are, regardless of what others may think. Unproductive worrying. Worrying is one of the most insidious habits we can develop, as it often feels like a natural and even necessary response to life's uncertainties. However, from a Stoic perspective, worrying is not only unproductive but also harmful to our well-being. The Stoics remind us that there is a clear distinction between what we can control and what we cannot. Most of the things we worry about, such as the future, the opinions of others, or potential negative outcomes, fall into the category of things we cannot control. When we engage in excessive worrying, we are essentially expending mental and emotional energy on something that is beyond our influence. This not only leads to stress and anxiety but also diverts our attention away from the present moment, where we actually have the power to take meaningful action. Worrying can also create a feedback loop of negativity, where the more we worry, the more we reinforce our fears, leading to even more worry. In this way, worrying becomes a form of mental clutter that prevents us from thinking clearly and acting decisively. The Stoic approach to this problem is to focus on what is within our control, namely, our own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. By shifting our attention away from the uncertain future and toward the present moment, we can break the cycle of worry and regain a sense of calm and clarity. This does not mean ignoring potential challenges or pretending that everything will be fine. Rather, it means acknowledging the uncertainty of life and accepting that some things are simply out of our hands. When we let go of the need to control every outcome, we free ourselves from the burden of worry and open ourselves up to the possibility of living with greater ease and flexibility. By quietly eliminating unproductive worrying, we can focus our energy on what truly matters, taking thoughtful, deliberate action in the present and trusting that we will be able to handle whatever the future holds when it arrives.
Attachment to material possessions. In a world that often equates success and happiness with wealth and material abundance, it is easy to become attached to our possessions and the pursuit of more. However, Stoicism teaches us that material possessions are inherently fleeting and impermanent. No matter how much we acquire, the satisfaction we derive from these possessions is often short-lived. The more we have, the more we want, and the more we fear losing what we have. This attachment to material things can become a source of constant anxiety and dissatisfaction, as we place our happiness in something that is ultimately outside of our control. The Stoics believed that true contentment comes not from external wealth, but from inner tranquility and self-sufficiency. By quietly eliminating our attachment to material possessions, we free ourselves from the constant desire for more and the fear of losing what we have. This does not mean that we must live in poverty or reject all material comforts. Rather, it means cultivating a mindset of gratitude for what we have and recognizing that our happiness is not dependent on external things. When we stop equating our worth with our possessions, we can begin to live more simply and intentionally, focusing on what truly brings us joy and fulfillment. This shift in perspective also allows us to be more generous and less fearful of loss, as we realize that our true wealth lies in our character and our ability to live in accordance with our values. By letting go of attachment to material things, we can experience a deeper sense of freedom and peace, knowing that our happiness is not tied to what we own but to how we live. Envy and comparison. Envy is a toxic emotion that arises from comparing ourselves to others and feeling inadequate as a result. It is a form of self-inflicted suffering that can erode our self-esteem and distort our perception of our own worth. The Stoics understood that comparison is a futile exercise because everyone's life is different, and what may appear to be success for others does not necessarily bring them happiness or fulfillment. Envy blinds us to the blessings in our own lives by fixating on what others have that we do not. It creates a sense of lack and dissatisfaction, even when we have enough. Quietly eliminating envy from our lives requires a shift in perspective. Instead of comparing ourselves to others, we must learn to appreciate our own unique path and recognize that we are not in competition with anyone. Our worth is not determined by how we measure up to others, but by how we live in accordance with our values. When we stop comparing ourselves to others, we free ourselves from the constant pressure to keep up with societal expectations and can focus on our own personal growth and happiness. This shift allows us to develop a sense of contentment with what we have and who we are, rather than constantly striving for more. By letting go of envy, we open ourselves up to a deeper appreciation of our own lives and a greater sense of inner peace. The fear of failure. Failure is often seen as something to be avoided at all costs, but Stoicism teaches us that failure is an inevitable part of life and an essential component of growth. The fear of failure can be paralyzing, preventing us from taking risks, pursuing our goals, or stepping outside of our comfort zones. This fear is rooted in a desire for perfection and an aversion to discomfort, but it ultimately limits our potential and keeps us stuck in a state of inaction. The Stoics believed that failure is not something to be feared, but rather an opportunity for learning and self-improvement. Every failure provides valuable feedback, teaching us what works and what doesn't, and helping us to refine our approach. Quietly eliminating the fear of failure requires a mindset shift. We must learn to embrace failure as a natural part of the process of growth, rather than something to be avoided at all costs. This does not mean being reckless or careless, but rather being willing to take calculated risks and learn from the outcomes, regardless of whether they are successful or not. By reframing failure as a learning experience, we can overcome the fear that holds us back and develop greater resilience, confidence, and adaptability. When we let go of the need for perfection and accept that failure is a normal part of life, we can approach challenges with a greater sense of curiosity and openness, knowing that even if we stumble, we will emerge stronger and wiser for it. Resentment and grudges. Resentment is a heavy burden to carry, and it often stems from past hurts or perceived injustices that we have not been able to let go of. Holding on to grudges keeps us trapped in a cycle of anger, bitterness, and victimhood, preventing us from moving forward and living fully in the present. The Stoics believed that holding on to resentment is not only harmful to our mental and emotional health, but also counterproductive to our growth and well-being. When we allow past wrongs to fester in our minds, we give them power over us, allowing them to shape our thoughts, emotions, and actions. Quietly eliminating resentment requires a practice of forgiveness, not necessarily for the sake of the other person, but for our own peace of mind. Forgiveness does not mean condoning bad behavior or forgetting what was done, but rather releasing the emotional attachment to the event and allowing ourselves to heal. By letting go of grudges, we free ourselves from the emotional weight that keeps us stuck in the past and prevent us from experiencing the fullness of life in the present. This act of release is not about excusing others, but about reclaiming our own power and choosing to live without the burden of unresolved anger. When we let go of resentment, we create space for peace, compassion, and emotional freedom, allowing us to move forward with a lighter heart and a clearer mind. The pursuit of pleasure. In our modern society, the pursuit of pleasure is often glorified as the ultimate goal of life. We are bombarded with messages that suggest that happiness can be found in the next indulgence, whether it be food, drink, entertainment, or material possessions. However, Stoicism teaches us that the relentless pursuit of pleasure is a shallow and ultimately unsatisfying endeavor. Pleasure is fleeting, and the more we chase it, the more it eludes us. Moreover, the pursuit of pleasure often leads to overindulgence, addiction, and a lack of self-discipline, which can detract from our overall well-being and sense of purpose. The Stoics believed that true happiness comes not from external pleasures, but from inner tranquility and a life lived in accordance with virtue. By quietly eliminating the constant pursuit of pleasure, we can cultivate a deeper sense of fulfillment that is not dependent on external circumstances. This does not mean rejecting pleasure altogether, but rather practicing moderation and self-discipline, and recognizing that true contentment comes from within. When we stop chasing after fleeting pleasures, we can focus on what brings lasting joy and meaning to our lives, such as meaningful relationships, personal growth, and contributing to the greater good. This shift allows us to experience a deeper and more enduring sense of happiness that is not subject to the whims of external circumstances. The desire to control others. The need to control others is a common source of frustration and conflict in relationships, but Stoicism teaches us that we cannot control anyone but ourselves. Trying to control others, whether through manipulation, coercion, or persuasion, only leads to frustration and resentment. People are autonomous beings with their own thoughts, feelings, and actions, and trying to impose our will on them is both futile and disrespectful. The Stoics believed that true freedom comes from accepting that we cannot control others, only our own responses to them. By quietly eliminating the desire to control others, we free ourselves from the constant frustration and disappointment that comes from trying to change people who are not willing or able to change. This does not mean being passive or indifferent to the actions of others, but rather recognizing that our power lies in how we choose to respond to them. When we let go of the need to control others, we create more harmonious and respectful relationships, and we are better able to focus on our own growth and well-being. This shift allows us to approach our interactions with others from a place of acceptance and compassion, rather than judgment and control, creating more peaceful and fulfilling relationships. The illusion of perfection. Many of us are trapped by the illusion of perfection, believing that we must be perfect in order to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. This belief creates immense pressure and leads to feelings of inadequacy and failure when we inevitably fall short of our own impossible standards. Stoicism teaches us that perfection is an illusion and that the pursuit of it only leads to unnecessary stress and disappointment. Life is inherently messy, and mistakes and imperfections are a natural part of the human experience. By quietly eliminating the need for perfection, we can embrace a more realistic and compassionate view of ourselves and our lives. Instead of striving for perfection, we can focus on progress and growth, recognizing that our worth is not determined by our achievements or our ability to meet some arbitrary standard of perfection. When we let go of the illusion of perfection, we free ourselves from the constant pressure to be something we are not, and we can begin to appreciate ourselves for who we are, flaws and all. This shift in perspective allows us to live more authentically and joyfully, knowing that we are enough just as we are.